Today I'm with the Victorian Deer Community Control Network, and particularly Peter and Johannes. How are you guys?
We're doing really well.
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, great to be here too. Now, feral deer in Australia, can you give me some idea of the impact that they're having on our economy or the natural environment?
Well, feral deer are emerging of one of Australia's worst pest animals, and across Australia there's probably about 2 million feral deer, but if we come back to Victoria and focus where we are at the moment, there are several 100,000 feral deer roaming our landscape, both on public land and private land, having a huge impact. And there's been some economic impact work done recently showing that over the next 30 years, if something isn't done about reducing the impact of feral deer, the cost is going to be over $2 billion.
Now, Johannes, fencing is one of the solutions, but deer are like any animal. If you want to control them, it's a multifaceted aspect, isn't it?
It has to be, yeah.
So we've got all sorts of options on the table, from shooting right through to other things, but fencing is a nice, I suppose, kind option, isn't it? Particularly when we're looking at the types of fences that we're looking at today.
Yeah, I think it is. My interest is more in the peri-urban area, where shooting is possibly dangerous and not just impossible because of close proximity of houses. So lots of people are asking about fencing. It's very impressive what sort of Landcare groups and farmers have done in country Victoria, but in the suburban area we haven't really discussed very much, and councils are still very reluctant to even consider and give permits. It's very difficult. But I have been so impressed with some, and like in the Upper Yarra Valley and then in the northeast of Victoria, they have done fantastic work with fencing, and it keeps the deer out without necessarily killing it. So and it keeps the crops and stock safe.
Now, your organisation, along with Gallagher and along with Whites and along with Decker, have been investigating some different types of fencing that are options now for people to use, because the old standards that are 30 years old now are a bit out of date. They still state a 1.9 metre high fence, and they still state old technology type fencing. But the reality is you don't necessarily need that high of an impact fence on the environment to do the job, do you?
That's what I have learned from actually Gallagher. I didn't realize the electromagnetic field which animals can sense, so that you don't have to have sort of a huge fence. You can have even down to 1.2 or something. But with electricity, the electromagnetic field, the animal senses it and just doesn't get near to the fence. So I think it's just a fantastic, easy solution. It's a no-brainer to me.
We're training them to be polite and not come in where they're not wanted.
Exactly right, yeah.
Perfect. How can people get in touch with you if they've got a deer problem, particularly in a peri-urban area or in a more natural area? What are the options available to manage deer?
Look, it's really important to think of options, because like any invasive species, when it comes to control, you've got to look at the whole toolbox. It's not just fencing, there's all sorts of things. So if we're looking at controlling an animal like deer, the most important thing is prevention. We've got to stop deer getting where they're currently not. So that's part of a landscape scale control. And then where do we start to eradicate deer from? So there are smaller patches around the state and really important places where deer eradication is actually possible, but certainly not across the whole state. So it's a matter of being strategic and thinking about that. Then we need to come back and say, well, there are big populations in these places. Let's start to contain deer so they stop spreading. Those three things are really important. But given all that, deer aren't going anywhere quickly. There's always going to be problems with deer, and it comes back to asset protection. So some landowners, the only option they've really got is to actually protect their important assets, whether they're important biodiversity assets like behind us here, where this person's trying to create a sanctuary and need to keep deer out, or it's their vineyards or their cattle grazing paddocks or whatever. So that's when fencing comes in. Fencing is an expensive option, and it's not going to get rid of deer. But when it comes to landowners being able to manage deer, it's one of their tools that they have. Our role within the network is to make all the options available for people. So we've been looking at, today electric fencing options this morning. We've also learned about the standard 1.9 metre high fences that people are building in places. And I think the key message that we've really learnt today is establish your objective. What are you trying to achieve? Is it total exclusion? Do you need wildlife to move through your fence? Is electricity relevant to where you are or not. So you've got to work through all those sorts of things. Establish your objective, and then what's your best option.
You have a number of options now available for landholders, depending on where they are and depending on whether you want to control deer or eradicate deer from an area, and people can get onto you for options, can't they?
They can go to our website. We've got a range of things there. We've got a deer kit that we developed that walks landowners through. It's like a decision support tool that they work out what's the best tool for them to use. We'll keep developing that, and we'll probably improve that for the fencing options. So they can follow that through our deer kit. We've got a resource page where they can go and look at all different resources available, whether it's commercial harvesting, fencing, you know, all the options that are available. So if you're interested in reducing the impact of deer on the natural environment or your own asset, join the network and you'll join a lot of other people that are trying to do the same thing.
Now, Ron, you're into Landcare. You're,
Yep.
in fact in Macclesfield Landcare, aren't you?
Yes, that's right.
And you do property management plans.
Yes.
And it often comes down to the poor old fencing contractor to look after all of these different
Yes.
things. And there's many ways to skin a cat, aren't there?
Yes.
So we're here at ECOS, and we were talking before with Jo, and she had concerns about electric wires near kids. So it was decided they needed a different solution.
Yes.
So they got their fencing contractor to put up something completely different, but this looks a little bit more traditional, doesn't it?
It is. Yes, very much so. So we've got 1.5 metres of wire mesh. We've got a gap at the bottom.
And that's about 200, isn't it?
About 200, so the wildlife can come and go, but it keeps the deer out.
And we've got 15 line wires, so it's fairly dense.
It's very, very dense, very strong.
Yep.
So the deer can't push their head in and open it up, which they can with cheaper mesh.
And it's also, that's the point too, isn't it? You don't want to use cheap mesh, you want to use a stiff stay or a lock knot or something like that, because you don't want them to be able to put their head in and move the wires apart, do you?
Yep. Some deer might try and get over it. I'd like to see the top wire being electric, which would stop the deer from climbing over it.
That'd stop a lot of things, I reckon.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is they're using their fences here because they've got this whole environmental bent. They're using their fences here as a filter. So they're allowing the wombats, they're allowing the wallabies, they're allowing the rabbits.
And the echidnas.
And the echidnas and all that to come through underneath, but they're filtering out the deer. If there's high pressure on them, or if there's lovely green feed in here and it's a drought, they're going to come underneath.
9 times out of 10 it's going to work.
Now they've also gone with a 3 metre spacing on their posts as well, because they're using steel posts except in the corners. So they've brought those posts down to a 3 metre spacing just to increase the strength of the fence.
Yep. I think the proof of the pudding when they start growing lettuces over here and
they actually harvest a lettuce.
See if the deer like lettuce.
Guys, if you like this sort of stuff, don't forget hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. There's plenty more on timthompson.ag. Catch you next week, guys.
Thanks, Tim.